Yeah, hanging in there. 8 classes left. I was just counting, right? That's it. It's kind of exciting, kind of sad. I, I always feel like it's a mix as we get closer to the end, but we're definitely getting there. We're like mid-April, right? We're almost there. So hang in there. Like it's supposed to be like 80 tomorrow, which makes it feel like summer is coming. I wish it would stay like cold and rainy, but I recognize that we're getting closer to summer. I have to let that go eventually. Bless you. So, I'm going to talk about that at the end today. I'll talk about the final paper as promised a little bit for like the last bit of our time that we have, and then we'll get back to this continuing on with the personality disorders. And before I keep going forward, right? We ended last time we talked about antisocial personality, and we'll pick up today with borderline and move forward. But any like lingering questions or thoughts or anything from the previous ones? Anything from before we keep adding a little bit, just to make sure?
This is the most early I've been in months.
Nice job, nice job. You are like right there. You did it. I'll give you full credit for it. So glad you made it. So, all right, well, then we'll pick up with borderline. So last time we talked about antisocial, which I said was the most dangerous to others. Borderline personality disorder is really the most dangerous to self. It's a very challenging disorder, also a very misunderstood disorder. And just as a side note, where it gets its name from. So we used to talk about people having neurotic or psychotic disorders. Neurotic disorders would mean that you can't control your emotions. They're kind of like out of balance, out of check. Psychotic disorders are things like schizophrenia, where you're out of contact with reality. This disorder was thought to be on the borderline between neurotic and psychotic, which is where the name came from. So we don't use neurotic and psychotic as disorders anymore, just more descriptors. But that's where we got the term borderline personality. It was on the border between, someone who was kind of just out of balance and couldn't control their emotions versus out of contact with reality. And it's a very commonly confused disorder. A lot of people have been diagnosed with this. We're starting to think might have more things like complex post-traumatic stress disorder or CPTSD. It's sometimes called like emotionally unstable personality disorder. It's kind of gone by a lot of different things over time, but it's a disorder that has a lot of like instability in self-image, mood, relationships, a lot of like impulsive behavior and emptiness. There's a lot of components to this which make it very challenging for somebody to live with, and also very challenging for the people in that person's life as well. So let's write some words up here for this one. I'm just going to abbreviate it BPD, borderline personality disorder. One thing that's really common with this is reactivity of mood. So someone with this has marked reactivity of mood, which means that they are very reactive to things around them, right? Oftentimes someone who has what's known as borderline personality disorder engages in something called splitting, right? Everything is very like black and white, right? There's nothing in between. You're either like amazing and perfect and wonderful, or you're awful and I hate you, right? It's kind of like this black and white splitting behavior that's very common, very reactive to things that could be very happy 1 minute and very upset and angry the next, and then back to happy again. Right, tending to react very strongly to things in the moment. There's a lot of emptiness that comes with this disorder, feelings of chronic emptiness inside, right? And again, very commonly seen in CPTSD as well. And there's a lot of like common causes between the two. That's something that we're kind of researching a lot at the moment. But we see a lot of emptiness, a lot of reactivity of mood. There's instability and impulsivity. It kind of has some elements in common with bipolar disorder in that way. There's a lot of like dangerous behaviors that can happen here, like impulsive or reckless behaviors. Suicidality and suicidal gestures are really common with this disorder. You see a lot of like self-harming behaviors as a way to manage all the emotion, a way to manage the emptiness. And so you see a lot of that like suicidality, impulsivity, instability. I have a little video that I just found online that kind of highlights some of these things a little more. Let me play that for you, and then we can go back and keep talking about it. I just thought it was kind of helpful, kind of talking about some of the elements of this disorder and kind of explaining them in a way that I thought was maybe a little bit helpful. And then I'll see what you think. Turn this up. Very common with this disorder. And they mentioned fear of abandonment, and that is another really, really big element of this disorder. And it's often rooted in childhood trauma, right? There's often some abandonment that took place when someone was very young, and that can kind of lead to this idea of that fear of abandonment and emptiness and some of these things that are going on with this. But again, can be very dangerous to self because this person is struggling badly with mood and oftentimes resorts to substances or self-harm behavior and things along those lines to cope with that. Very like challenging, a lot of like books about this, right? Very famous book about it, I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, right? And that title, I think, sums up this disorder in a lot of ways, right? It's that like, I hate you, I'm mad at you, but I love you so much, please don't go. It's that push and pull that's just constantly there with this. And there's a very specific type of therapy that goes with this disorder, enough so that we haven't talked about treatments for any of them, but this one was developed specifically to help with DBT, or I'm sorry, DBT was developed to help with BPD, right? Too many acronyms. But it's a lot of techniques of like looking at fact checking and looking at like ways to respond more effectively, to control your emotions so you don't lash out at somebody and push them away. It can be challenging to deal with the marked reactivity, right? Because it's often feeling like it's out of nowhere, especially when it like correlates with those fears of abandonment. Anyone with like stories or thoughts or anything about this? You know, people in your life maybe who have this, or any questions or anything? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the founder of that BPD herself.
Mm-hmm.
That's just on the photo. I have BPD,
Mm-hmm.
so like I've learned a little bit about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thing that I feel like is significant is like the physical feeling that comes with splitting.
Yeah.
Like it feels like I'm on fire.
Mm-hmm.
There's a hole in my stomach and I can't breathe.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to think.
And that hole in your stomach, sometimes people describe that as the emptiness, like almost feels like a hole, right? I had a client, it was years ago, they called it their like empty black hole, right? And I've heard like a lot of variations on that, of like the feeling that can come with that splitting and with that very black and white thinking, because the world isn't black and white, but when you get in that mentality,
Yeah.
it can be physically painful almost, right?
And the person with BPD, it's almost like they cannot reconcile people being good and bad at the same time.
Right, right. You're one or the other,
Yeah.
right? Which is the essence of splitting. So someone's either perfect and you love them more than anything, you know, and like you almost can't stand to be around them because you love them so much. And then they do something really small, like they don't text you back or they don't respond, or like they do something that you question, and I hate you. How did I ever love you? Like I want you to leave. Like I never want to be with you. And then they leave and no, I love you. Please come back. Right.
An example, we talked about this. You can Skywalker.
I know. I went home and watched it after we talked about it last time. I actually watched 1 through 3 over the weekend
Yeah.
because of that.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Because like he, in 1 second he thinks Obi-Wan is the wisest, he's the probably Obi-Wan thinks Obi-Wan is the most powerful, and then he's like, I hate him, he's holding me back.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of,
And that fear of losing Padme, right? Like, and like, I'll go to any lengths to do that. Very black and white thinking, right? And when he flips all the way over to the dark side, right? Yeah, I literally went home and watched, I'm up through 6. I've watched 1 through 6 over the weekend. Yeah.
So when I first like was kind of figuring out what was going on, I always remember like the paranoia, especially. Like, I was walking the street, everybody wants to kill me. Like everybody hates me. Like nobody likes me. And like I never trust anything
Sure.
anybody ever said. And so I like didn't have any friends because I'm like, I don't believe you. Like, but how can you like?
Sure.
Intense. I'm so awful. Like the way I describe it is I'm the biggest piece of shit the world revolves around. Like it's like this, I'm so important, but I'm so awful.
Sure.
Like, and it's weird. Like it's super, honestly, it's just a weirdness. And it really like ruins relationships because you have no idea. You think you're the right, like all the time. You think you're the one getting hurt all the time.
Yeah.
In reality, you're not. Like, you're like putting up with people, like the wet dog effect, like you're in a bad mood, so not everybody else has to be in a bad mood.
Sure.
Because we're so uncontainable, and it's just like, you have big emotions, and everybody's gonna see that you have big emotions, and it's super, makes you feel really vulnerable, because you can't hide that.
Mhm.
Like, you literally can't, like, you just feel naked, like, if you're upset, everybody's gonna know you're upset, because you cannot fake it. It's just, oh, it's so crazy.
Yeah, it's a challenging disorder, and like as you were talking about that, I just had a thought of there's a perspective called IFS. I don't know if any of you heard of it, internal family systems therapy. Really commonly used for this as well, just like DBT, right? We have IFS and DBT for VPD, and I could keep going. Like there's so many of these things, it's ridiculous. But IFS or internal family systems looks at what's called parts work, right? That each one of us has a bunch of different parts within us, and you might have a part that is paranoid and struggles. You might have a part that feels one way and a part that feels another way, and they can be obviously at odds with each other. And a lot of like borderline personality work has started to like revolve around this parts perspective, right? And how can we look at how different parts feel? And sometimes people enjoy the idea of like parts of me feel certain way instead of saying like all of me feels this way. There's like a freedom in like delegating it out to a part that you could work with. So it's another like really common perspective, just like DBT, that's kind of gaining some popularity in working with people who have borderline personality disorder. I've seen a lot of books about it. And again, like also working with people who have CPTSD, which is very commonly correlated with this. We've seen a lot of that work. Yeah.
So it's kind of related to I Hate You Don't Leave Me.
Yeah.
And it's back to Star Wars, but it's for a reason.
Sure.
Something I wish the films like showed more was something that like the TV shows showed really well was Anakin Skywalker was extremely beloved by everyone. And he had this deep compassion and like desire to help other people.
Sure.
And he was very fun to be around. But he was very impulsive. And it almost like all lended itself into this very positive so. But when he split, he completely shifted to this like anxious, like angry, like violent person. And something I Hate You Don't Leave Me talks about is like how the person with BPD, when they're in a good mood, they draw people toward them. They're very attractive to other people.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to the narcissistic personality.
Or antisocial with the charismatic, which is why they're often talked about together, right? They have elements of that charisma.
Yeah.
The person can be very charismatic and very like almost luring people in. But then they have that other side as well. It's interesting, and that's an interesting like extra layer there.
I mean, BPD, like relationships intense,
Yeah.
like, in a good way. And they burn really bright, and they burn you. Like it's out of control.
Sure.
Just an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Any other like thoughts or comments? Anything over here? I don't want to look at all of you for any comments or questions, thoughts, anything else? And dangerous to self because of this, a lot of suicidality because the emotions are so intense, right? And oftentimes it's hard to see beyond that moment. And as I said, a lot of like therapy specific to this, like DBT and then that internal family systems, sometimes people even doing like EMDR kind of work to like work through traumas that might have contributed. But definitely a challenging disorder. The other two here in the dramatic category, there are two more, and these have a lot in common, but they're definitely a little bit different, right? There's so much overlap between all of these, but histrionic personality disorder, histrionic comes from the root of hysteria, right? And if that helps you kind of remember, this person is often very like dramatic, very emotional, needing to be the center of attention, right? Needing a lot of attention. Both of these disorders need a lot of attention, but in kind of slightly different ways. So what we see here is a lot of like dramatic and shallow emotions. Right, so oftentimes very dramatic in the way they'll talk about things, but the emotions, even though they're very present, are shallow. See a lot of like seductive behaviors and flirtatious behaviors. Relatively common with this, needing again to be the center of attention, a lot of attention seeking kind of stuff. So what you see is there's often this like urge to be in the spotlight, right? I need all eyes on me, everyone paying attention to me. And let me tell you the dramatic tale of how I took a sip of my water, right? Like, it's just like everything has to be very, very dramatic and like attention grabbing. My mother-in-law, I love her so much, but she is so easy to pick on. I would so put her here, right? Everything is dramatic, everything. And she flirts with everyone. Like, we went out to dinner, we went to Islands over the weekend, and like she's flirting with this, like she's 70 something, she's like 73. She's flirting with this like 22-year-old woman. Like, I'm like, there's so many issues with this, I don't even know where to begin. And like my father-in-law sitting right next to her and he finds it funny, but like she's flirting with them, like everything is like that. She took 20 minutes to like tell us a story about nothing. Like everything is just like so dramatic, but yet shallow, right? There's just like this shallowness to like those very like pervasive emotions. A lot of like vanity can come with this as well, right? There's some vanity that sometimes kind of is along the lines of narcissistic personality disorder, but a lot of like, again, like shallow, dramatic emotion. Narcissistic personality disorder is similar, but there's a little bit more of like an entitled ego that comes with it. So narcissistic many S's in there, right? Narcissistic. With this one, I'm going to write entitlement, like entitled, arrogant, right? Kind of feeling like everything is owed to you. There's this lack of empathy that comes with it. Oh, and then let's see if I want to add anything else. There's a lot of like grandiosity, like I'm super important, I can do anything. Right. So with this one, what you see is somebody, I put like a picture of a person with a big head, right? There's a lot of like, I'm entitled, I'm important, I'm the best, I'm beautiful and amazing. I only want to surround myself with other beautiful, intelligent, perfect people. There's this just constant need for like everyone to look up to you and admire you for the amazing person that you are. Yeah. It can, yeah, right. It's like the classic, like you feel inferior, so you project superiority. Like Adler would call that like a superiority complex. It can for sure. And there's often a correlation of like, I feel very inferior somewhere deep down below that I've buried. So I project, yes. Yeah, and like projecting that like exaggerated sense of self-importance to counter for the fact that you feel so inferior. That's very common. Yeah.
It can, but it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to. It does not have to, but it is something that we do see like a fair amount of the time. Yeah.
So the histrionic version of shallow, does that mean that it's coming from a place that's not contingent on something happening deep within? Or what does shallow mean? Like it's
Sure. Like, so everything is like a big deal, but they move on very quickly from it, right?
Okay.
Like, or like I'll cry for like little to no reason. It's almost like they're putting on a performance in a sense, like almost like acting, right? Like I'm very emotional and like everything is like such a huge deal, but like I can move on pretty quickly and fleet to the next thing really like easily because it's not a deep-seated like issue or emotion, if that makes sense.
I like, you know, as a professional, you're working with people to kind of figure out, but it just seems like some of these behaviors can get kind of confusing and then
Yeah.
you're like, well, which one does this person have?
Yeah, especially within categories, like these two, very commonly confused, right? And so you have to look at like subtle differences, right? This person, oftentimes this person isn't going to feel that like grandiosity and like arrogance in the world is owed to me. It's really dominated by like very dramatic, like attention-seeking efforts versus this person tends to feel like they're super important and like the world is like, should be in debt to them for how amazing they are, kind of thing. So it's oftentimes little subtle differences, but the issue with these disorders is you could have one person go to 5 therapists and get 5 different diagnoses, right? And that's the problem with any disorder, but there's a lot of overlap, right? So it's kind of looking at the like little subtle differences between them. Yeah.
Is it possible to have a multiple of these?
No, right? And so I mentioned that at the beginning with these, you're only really supposed to have one, because it's your entire personality,
Yeah.
right? And so you can have like personality disorder, NOS, like not otherwise specified, where you don't fit neatly into one. But traditionally, we try to only diagnose one. Otherwise, we're in essence saying you have more than one personality, and therefore you would have like dissociative identity disorder. There's some debate on that, but generally you should only diagnose one. Mhm. I have a great example of this. I think he's like the perfect example of this personally. Gaston, right, from Beauty and the Beast is like the ultimate like narcissistic personality, like attractiveness. Like I'm the most attractive man in town, therefore, like, and I've decided you're the most attractive female in town, so we should get married. Like showing up, let me invite her to the wedding, but I got to go ask her to marry me first. Of course, she's going to say yes. Why wouldn't she say yes? Like my dreams are your dreams. That's very typical with this disorder. Again, just that kind of big head, lack of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and often that sense of like grandiosity and entitlement and arrogance that can come with it. The last group of personality disorders, the last three, are really dominated by anxiety, right? These are the anxious personality disorders. We have avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. So three in this category. Avoidance personality disorder. With this one, we see someone who has a lot of discomfort in social situations. They have overwhelming feelings of inadequacy and are extremely sensitive to any kind of negative evaluation or criticism. So they tend to avoid social relationships, hence the name, because they have such feelings of discomfort in them. So some things we could put here, oftentimes feeling very inferior. Right, feeling not good enough. You're not good enough to be around other people. You're not good enough to be loved by other people or cared for by others. A lot of discomfort in social situations. The difficulty, though, is oftentimes with this individual, unlike like schizoid, we said there tend to be like loners. With this individual, they want badly to be cared for by others. They want badly to be around and connected to others, but they are so uncomfortable around other people that they oftentimes end up intensely lonely. Right? This person often really struggles with feeling very, very lonely because they have such a hard time with feeling inferior and feeling like others don't care about them. They oftentimes have an intense fear of embarrassment. Right? They don't want to be embarrassed in front of other people. I'm not going to take any risks because what if I look stupid? What if I mess up? What if other people judge me? Right? And so oftentimes, again, this person can be very timid and anxious, very like hypersensitive to any kind of negative like criticism or evaluation from other people, not taking risks, believing themselves to be inferior and like unappealing to others. And this gets really dominating across everything for them. And again, oftentimes winding up intensely lonely as a result, because they're too afraid to be around others for fear of being rejected or embarrassed and so on. Kind of a opposite of that in a way, dependent personality disorder. With this one, people have a lot of clinging and obedience. So I'm going to put clinging, very submissive. Oftentimes with this disorder, there's a lot of like helplessness when alone. And there's a fear of separation. What you see with this disorder, with dependent personality disorder, is an individual will cling on to another person for dear life. They are dependent on that other person for everything. Little decisions, big decisions. I can't do it without you, right? I can't make up my mind on what to wear today. What do you think I should wear today? What are you majoring in? So I'm going to major in that, right? It's like everything is surrounding this source of like security, and you cling to that person for dear life. You're willing to do anything that they ask because you don't want to upset them because they might leave you, and you feel incredibly helpless when you're alone. Right. So there's a lot of like excessive lengths to gain the support or nurturing from another person very uncomfortable by themselves. Yeah,
I bet this is narcissistic personality disorder quite a couple.
that could be challenging, right? Or it could work in a way. I mean, in a sense, if you have somebody who is like you, I need you for everything. And the person who's narcissistic wants to be needed for everything. But the hard part is the individual who's narcissistic won't have enough like nurturing and care to probably satisfy this person in the long run. But in the short term, it could work, right? It's interesting, thinking of the dynamics between these, right? It could definitely get complicated at times. Right? I have the, excuse me, like the best example of this. And if you ever plan to be a therapist, if any of you in here plan to be a therapist, you have to at some point watch the movie What About Bob? Right? I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's an older movie. But the character Bob in this movie has a lot of issues. And he definitely has this dependent personality disorder. And the person that he decides to cling to and be afraid to be separated from is his therapist. Right. And so he stalks his therapist. He like causes his therapist to have a mental breakdown, marries his therapist's sister. It goes on and on and on. So I have a little example of this, and you can just see that clinging behavior and that fear and need to be taken care of. In this case, he has attached and decided to do this with his therapist, which is obviously and need therapy himself, right? But it's just a really like entertaining movie and about boundaries. And this person tends to struggle pretty badly with boundaries, right? And whatever individual they decide to attach to and have be their source of like security, they really struggle to have that person not be around them. And it can be very much so that they go from person to person, right? So maybe it's their partner and then they break up with that person, it's the next person. But even the littlest decisions struggling to do on their own, just needing to be taken care of and needing that other person. And so being very clingy and submissive to them. Right? And again, that was a What About Bob, right? If you want to watch it. And that happens a lot. Like I will say, having been a therapist, like clients will sometimes cling to you as their source of security. Though I never had anyone show up at my house like that. That would be pretty intense, right? But I've had people like definitely have like kind of stalking behavior or call me like multiple times to kind of trying to even track me down outside of work. Like those are things that happen when you are helping people who are struggling pretty badly. So just something to keep in mind. The last one, my favorite one, right? If I'm allowed to have a favorite, OCPD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, has a lot in common name-wise with OCD, but it's a little bit different, right? They're a little bit different disorders, very commonly confused. With this one, we see a lot of, I'm going to write perfection, order, and control. Everything has to be just so. Like everything has to be perfect or just like the way that you want it to be with this disorder. There's a lot of like inflexible and rigid behavior. And I think the reason this one is my favorite is I've had a lot of people in my life with this disorder, right? I apparently tend to be attracted to it on some level, right? Because it just seems to be who I end up with like every time. But one of my first like partners that I ever had when I was in community college had OCPD. Now let me tell you a story because I think it kind of like highlights this pretty well. Like we had been dating like maybe 3 months or so. It feels weird to think about this person. This is like 20 years ago, right? But we had been dating for about like 3-4 months. We were going to Disneyland together for the first time, right? We both had season passes and went all the time. And we were like on our way to Disney. And like on our way, we're talking, you know, what do you like to do? What do you like to do? And I was like, as long as I get churros, I'm pretty happy like with whatever else we do, right? Like I like to go on the rides, but I go for the food. I'm sure that's not super surprising. And I know where all the churro stops are. And like, that was really like my one request. I was like, as long as we do like a few churro stops, I'm good after that, right? And so this person, her name was Kristen, was like, okay, well, I really like this ride, and like, we're kind of coming up with a plan. It's good to have a plan. I like plans. Plans are good, but plans can go too far, right? So we get off like the Mickey and Friends like tram, and we go into the park. And she's like, okay, we're gonna go here, and then we're gonna go here, and then we're gonna go here, and then we're gonna go here. Like she had the whole day laid out, like bit by bit by bit by bit, right? And I'm like, and the churro stops, like, they gotta be in there as long as they're in there, we're good, right? I don't care, like, have your plan, I'll do whatever. And nothing wrong with the plan, but item one on the plan was closed. And it ruined the entire day, right? So she was like, okay, first we're gonna go to Splash Mountain. Because it's like, no, there'll be no line, no one wants to get wet at 8 in the morning. And I was like, yeah, nobody, me neither, but okay, whatever, like, that's fine, right? So we book it over to Splash Mountain, closed. Right, and I was like, no worries, we'll just go to item two, right? We'll go right over to Thunder Mountain, like, and we'll just keep going with the list. She could not let go that it was closed, right? And that's very common with this disorder. Everything has to be perfect. And if it doesn't go perfectly, if it doesn't go just so the way that you planned, there's like this complete loss of flexibility and ability to move on. And so like, after like a lot of coaxing and patience, like I'm a pretty patient person, right? I got her to like move on to the next item and we went to Haunted Mansion, but the whole time we're on Haunted Mansion, she's like talking to me about the plan from here. And I'm like, just enjoy the ride, like red flags. No, I'm just kidding. Like I should have known, right? But like, I was like, just enjoy the ride and calm down. But the whole time we're on it, she's like, okay, so after this, we'll go here, we'll go here, we'll go here, we'll go here. You know, and it just like the whole day was literally ruined because of that one item on the list being closed. Right now, fast forward a few years, my partner that I've been with for 20 years has OCPD as well. Right. So again, I seem to be attracted to it. I don't know why. Right. But I went over to her house for the first time and she was like, if you could not sit on the couch, because I hate when people like mess up the pillows. I was like, where do you want me to sit then? Like, I was like, okay, I love this person incredibly. I'm like, I'll sit on the floor. I don't care, whatever, right? So literally, like, she would leave for the day and I wouldn't sit on the couch because she would know and would have to fix the pillows. She'd be like, don't put my laundry away, like, which I was totally fine with not doing, right? Don't put my laundry away because I want everything in a specific place and they have to be this far apart in the closet. Like, everything had to be just so. Everything had to be perfect. And like the funniest thing to me after all of these years of dating people or being married to someone with OCPD is I am that way now, right? It can rub off on you. Like I have like little weird things, like my cups have to be dried like perfectly and put properly in the cabinet. My kids know this, right? And they're very like careful and particular about it. I like to put my clothes away in a specific way now, like all my stuff has like, I've been rubbed off on over the years after having like so many people in my life with this. But her father, like my partner's dad, is very much this way. And that's probably where she got it from, right? He hates his couch pillows being messed up. He hates when like anyone moves his stuff. So we have this like passive aggressive battle all the time. I'll go to his house and just move his couch pillows and I smile and I'm so happy. And then he comes to my house and puts my cups away around like 20 years of passive aggressive, like fighting back and forth. But it's very much like everything has to be perfect. Like it wouldn't surprise me, you go to someone's house who has this, you open the cabinet and everything's organized, label front, everything together, right? Like if you make a mark on the paper of your notes, you have to rewrite it all, right? And so like everything is kind of like that. You lose that flexibility and openness and efficiency because everything has to be just so. Right. And the funny thing is like one of our kids is like very much this way. Like I put a kid here drawing with a ruler. Like my daughter Kaya, if I put a book in the wrong spot, she'll like correct me and move it. Like she can't just leave it. Right. Like everything has to be exactly where it is. And I can't blame her. She has two parents, like one who definitely has this and one who's like on the edge after 20 years. So she's very much that way as well. Right. And again, to a small degree, it's not a big deal. But when it causes problems because you can't adapt or move on when things don't go according to plan, it starts to become an issue. I did have lots of churros that day and it was fun, right? But we weren't together too much longer after that, right? Not that it was that. But, any questions or thoughts or anything about OCPD? Yeah. Yeah, so with OCD, there's like a distressing thought and then you perform a ritualistic behavior to get rid of it, right? So like if I don't wash my hands, I'm gonna get sick and I'll get contaminated. If I don't check the door to make sure it's locked, someone could break in. So that one's more like a distressing thought followed by a ritualistic behavior. This one's more like an obsession with everything being perfect and just so. And they're very commonly confused. Right. People will be like, oh, that's so OCD of you. I'm like, no, it's OCPD of you, right? Like they're very commonly confused that way. Anything Anything else with these for the moment? Yeah. Yeah.
My best friend was really, and I always wonder, like, what the best way is to help someone like that. It seems like if I tried to be there for her, it made things worse, like she was more dependent.
Sure.
Phone that was sort of making this much because she felt worse, so I never knew what the best way is.
Kind of a lose-lose sometimes, right? And I think the best way is to try and be there as much as you can, but to try and push them a little bit, right? Like whenever you have that opportunity, same with the last one, right? Like trying to just push them just a little, right? Like, yeah, I'll call you in like 5 minutes. They have to wait those 5 minutes. Those might be a hard 5 minutes, right, for them, but they have to wait. Right? What do you think, right? Like trying to just kind of give them a little bit less at times so that they have to give a little more on their own, but you're gonna get resistance from them, right? So it's a fine line of not wanting to not be there for them, but also not wanting to enable them. So I think when you can push a little bit, same with this one, right? Like if you can like mess things up just a tiny bit where it's tolerable, then it gets like a little bit better, a little bit better. So just a little like gentle pushing when you can, or space when you can, I think is the best way to go. My partner will always like take my notes. This is gonna be painful for me to do, but I'm gonna do it, right? Take my notes and go like this on them. That hurts to do, like I won't lie to you, right? Like I want to reprint it so bad, and she'll be like, just deal with it. And I'm like, but this is your fault, not mine. Like, well, that's my fault. Like, it's your fault that bothers me, right? But I always want to like, now I want to reprint it. That's going to drive me nuts, right? Like if I mess up in notes, I want to rewrite it. And so just getting yourself to leave it, right? Like I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to fix it. And it might bother me a little bit, but I can let it go, right? And that's kind of like one of the best ways is to just push a little bit and try and push a little bit of growth. Now I have a way to kind of review these. I think this is would be an incredibly fun party to go to, but I have this little worksheet where it's imagine a party where everyone there had a personality disorder, right? And so it's just like a little sheet of I think it's 8 people who have a personality disorder and they're all at a party together. So what I want you to do is find a couple of people, like 2, 3, 4 people, whatever's easy, and you're just going to turn in 1 sheet per group. But what you'll do is you'll read through this, and then on the back, you're going to decide which personality disorder you think each person has. You don't have to explain why, just which one. There's no overlap, so none of them are used more than once, and there are 2 that are not used. So it's a good opportunity for you to kind of see if you can figure out what they have. We'll talk about it, and then I'll collect it. So if you could find a couple of people, like 2, 3, 4 people, come up and grab one. Or if you want an extra one to read, that's fine. And go ahead and get started. You just need to turn in 1 per group. And again, if you want an extra one, you don't have to read it out loud. I have one.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're just no. Oh, it's okay. We didn't use it. What I would make. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
I'll inform you, I was only 2 minutes late today.
Have you normalized us coming in late?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I live far away.
I don't.
And I'm terrible.
It's like, I don't have no.
That's my excuse, I guess.
I don't, like, I'll just have to poop the last minute, or like, or I'll get obsessive about, I'll lose my earrings, and I will not be able to leave the house, I'll be like smashing back, you know, like.
Carol.
You guys, wait, do we just turn it on for one minute, for 2 minutes?
One shoot, but then I was.
Okay. Okay.
That's not the one that like they made everything about the law. No, it's just this. I was the state prison audience question. Should be doing themselves.
We're done. While they're asking, you're purposely embarrassed her. Banished. John is a menace. Oh, that's John. Throwing the heat. I don't want to. Wait, no, wait.
Oh. You think you want to? Yes.
You're fucking smart. Let's match the window and it's all the balloon. On the front. Kind of smart. Yeah. But let's just not put it in front of them. Just maybe put an A question mark.
William wanted to party something.
I just said the letter. You shouldn't have to write. You're making your life hard.
3. What the hell?
What was,
I'll do that one. Yeah. I'm not even sure about that one. Probably.
I was thinking paragraphs.
Yeah. It's
Oh.
jealous. The only kids are type. That's Harold. Doesn't talk to anybody. Whoa. No, I think it's schizotypal. Wait, what?
Okay, that makes it.
Wait, oh, actually, hold the phone.
Let's look at this.
Schizotypal has to have manic symptoms. It actually, I think it is schizoid.
Oh, you're good.
I messed that up.
Yeah.
No, I found the schizotypal. The negative portion in the room was finding souls.
Share.
Schizotypal. Schizoid, like you said. Extreme. Focus on it for 5 minutes about what he wants. And then what? That's what kind of strong.
Leave.
After everyone for exactly 5 minutes. With the party,
Oh, that way, that one.
Correct.
Let's try and take about 5 more minutes and we'll talk about it together.
okay, so like, speed like this, I'm looking at that.
Share. That's way.
Okay, Don, this is the dramatic. History on me. I think you're right, but it's not 100%. But I know Donna's history. Okay, Sherry. You remember the problem? Oh, geez, no borderline personality, because I'm pretty much, yeah, most of it modified. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's gone now. Yeah, and that's actually kind of remark that it's not. No, actually, I've looked at it. It's a lot more than those. So that's the right. I had a research paper for neurons. And I had to write the applications. Yeah.
Started on, the last part for the digest.
You're sharing these programs. Hey, I'm sure.
Yeah. I have to handle down the diagnosis of orders.
John came in with this one, you know, was beautiful. No, I was asking. I don't know, wait, this is- 30 minutes is period. For 30 minutes. What? Nothing matters in life.
What?
I said, well, positives.
Why are you even? I love that.
I don't even know it's gonna be just I think I could probably. Yeah.
You're right. And one is very much. Really not there.
Make sure if you're finishing up, you bring your first and last names on whichever one you're turning in. And we just like another minute and we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just hard. I like how I know that. I'm hearing super long. You're using the door. No, I thought you scared them up. Actually. Clear it over, please, John. Different photos.
Most of you look done or close, yeah. I would love to go to this party, right? Like, I want to be a fly on the wall at this party. So let's go through these, and I know it's a little like hard to tell them apart. But I think this is a great way to just kind of practice with that. So anyone, what do you think is going on with Donna? We had to give Donna personality disorder. What do you think Go on ahead, yeah.
Histrionic.
Histrionic, yeah, right? She's very, has that like shallow emotionality, needs to be the center of attention. Histrionic, I think fits Donna really well. How about William? Any thoughts with William? Yeah. Yeah, or schizotypal, like, see, it's easy to do, right? You're not the only one to do it. I actually think schizotypal, schizotypal, right, if it helps you think we've had, right? That like odd perception, odd magical thinking, right? Very typical with this, odd, right? Standing out, very much so, yeah.
Actually, the other day after we had learned about this, a friend had told me about like his sister's husband, who believes in the prophet.
Okay.
and, believes like marriage, things
Mhm.
like moved them, like their whole family into the desert because he was like afraid of certain. I forgot what it was.
Wow.
It was really bizarre.
Yeah.
Weird.
Right? It's so interesting, right? Like, there's a lot of people who really like have like some odd like thinking and perception, and it's just been there for a long time. Sometimes it just gets worse over time.
She was like, I think it's schizophrenic.
Could be. Oh, yeah, see, right? You're actually, I'm armed with more information. I love that. All right, how about Sherry? What do we think is happening with Sherry? Yeah. You're like, I want that one, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna take Sherry. Yeah, and I think that fits her best. A lot of you were struggling with Sherry, right? But it's that like the emotional reactivity, right? That I think is very like characteristic of borderline. How about Winston? What do we think about Winston? Yeah,
We said narcissistic.
Yeah. narcissistic, right? He's got a big head. He thinks he's super important. Let me tell you all about my everything because it's the most important. How about Peter?
Obsessive compulsive.
Yeah, I could date Peter in theory. I mean, there's an issue for it, right? But in theory, I could date Peter, right? Yeah, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, right? Exactly on time. Each of you get 5 minutes. I'm walking away, right? Like everything has to be just so. How about Doreen? Yeah. Yeah, paranoid. Yeah, right. Like thinking everything, there's something like out to get her, like there, you know, people are like having conspiracies and so on. How about Harold? Parents are gonna say, why is Harold even more? Like Harold, yeah. Yeah. Right, that kind of like loner, isolated out, not a lot of affect, not a lot, kind of emotionality. How about John? Yeah. Antisocial, yeah, right, that like lack of empathy, being very like common there, and some of that like dangerous kind of manipulative behavior. A lot of you did beautiful on this, right? Again, there's so much overlap, which makes them tricky. You won't have anything like this on the exam, you'll have like multiple choice, but I think this was a good practice. And again, sounds like fun to go to. I'd want to go. I could talk to Peter for a while, maybe at the park. So if you want to go ahead, pass those up, make sure again your names are on whatever one you want credit for. You only need to turn in the one. Thank you. All right, so we have like 9 minutes left. I think what I'll do. Let me talk about the paper because I promised I would, and then we'll wrap up with causes and treatments next time. And then with chapter what is it, 14, the next one, I almost always show a film and have you work on practicing diagnosing a character, kind of like you're doing in your paper. But so what we'll do on Wednesday, I'll wrap up this chapter and then we're going to watch the film What's Eating Gilbert Grape. It's an older movie, like Johnny Depp and Leonardo DiCaprio are in it. They're so young, it's funny to see. But it's a wonderful opportunity to take a character that could go in a couple of different directions and practice looking for signs and symptoms and how you could diagnose them, and kind of building up what you're doing in your final paper. And I think it's a great way to talk about and cover that chapter through his character. So for now, let's look at the paper. Sorry, didn't want to load here. If you're on Canvas, I've tried to put a lot of resources together for you for this paper because it's worth 100 points. It's worth the same as an exam. Please spend time on this, right? It's due on the 24th. So it's due a week from Wednesday. So hopefully if you haven't started thinking about it, you start thinking about it soon. You have that part 2, which was trying to help you kind of get going. So here are the instructions for the paper, which we'll look at in a moment. But notice underneath it, there are several sample papers. These are papers that people turned in the past that were really well written. if you're having a hard time figuring out how to structure the paper, you might take a look at some of these and see how they did it. These were all, again, really good and creative examples. There's a writing center handout that might be helpful for you, along with their PowerPoint slides, right? And so they talk a little bit about like APA formatting and so on. I'm not going to be very strict at all about APA, but there are a couple of things I want you to try, which I'll talk about in a moment. There's also some links to library resources on here, right? So there's some stuff on here that might be helpful. And if you scroll all the way down to where I have all the lectures recorded, below that, there's another video with like APA resources and how to use APA for this paper specifically, and then library resources as well. So I have lots of things on here for you if you're struggling. And as I've mentioned a few times, if you want me to look at a rough draft, which a few of you have already taken me up on, you can always send me a draft to look at, and I'd be happy to give you some feedback before it's due. So let's take a look at the instructions together. Right. So if you scroll down to part 3, as I mentioned, this is worth 100 points. It should be 5 to 6 pages, not including the title page or the references page. So every single one of your papers should have a title page. We'll say a title page, and then some pages in between, and a references page. So 5 to 6 pages of these, right, plus these 2 on either end. These are very minimal pages, right? So they're just not going to have a lot of information on them. But the first thing that I'm going to do when I look at your paper is, do you have a title page? If you don't have a title page, I know right off the bat you didn't even try APA. So that's one of the things that I want you to do, is have a title page. And I want you to have a references page. So it shouldn't say works cited or bibliography. In APA format, we use references, right? And on this references page, you should have your academic source and your show. That's all you need on here, but you're welcome to have more than one source if you wanted. But bare minimum, you need one academic source cited and your show cited. And on the title page, if you look at all those resources that I have on there, they'll show you exactly how to do that. They'll give you a sample title page, and it's very minimal as well. So these pages should be pretty brief. And then the bulk of your paper is in the middle, right? In your paper, what a lot of people do is they kind of follow the format of like a little introduction, a summary of their show, which should be kind of brief. It's not the focus of your paper. It's just a couple of paragraphs. Describing your character, like if you were to describe this character to somebody who knew nothing about them, how would you describe them? Kind of like paint a picture of your character. And then the bulk of your paper is going to be on diagnosing them, right? Try to narrow it down to 1 or 2 disorders at the most. If you do more than that, it's just going to be hard for you to cover. If you feel like there's more that you didn't cover, you could always take a paragraph at the end and kind of talk about the stuff that didn't fit perfectly. A lot of people will do that. And that's fine. As long as you make a good case for your diagnosis, that's all I'm looking for. Even if you're wrong, as long as you make a good case, right? And so what most people will do is cover the criteria in order to have the disorder. Those are called diagnostic criteria. And then you give examples from the show to support it. So let's say that you are going with schizotypal personality disorder, or schizotypical. I still like that better. Schizotypal. Right. And so you would say like odd or magical thinking, and then you give me an example from the show where they do that. And then after you've done that, which should be the bulk of your paper, you'll talk a little bit about causes and contributing factors and treatment. And maybe in the show, they do have some treatments that they do. You could talk about that or what you might do. Let's say your character dies. What could you have done if they didn't die, right? To help them, right? That happens with a lot of the characters people choose, like they don't receive treatment. If they have a diagnosis already, you can agree or disagree. That's totally fine. And then you might have like a little bit of like a closing like remark or comment. And again, like 5 to 6 pages without these 2. I never will take off if you go over, right? You're welcome to go over if you need to, like that's fine. But if you're under 5 to 6 pages, I guarantee you didn't go into enough depth. Okay. So that's kind of like the paper. Like those are the criteria for the paper. Are there any questions specifically about like what I'm looking for or not looking for or anything at all? Yeah.
So like 5 full pages?
Yeah, it should be like 5 to 6 pages in here. Right. So this should be like 5 to 6 pages. And in my experience, like that you need like at least 5 to really like cover all of those criteria. And then give examples and do all this. Anybody else for now? Yeah,
This might be a common question.
No.
but, You only want us diagnosing like one, I guess illness, right?
yeah, 1, 2 at the most. Right, because if you do more than 2, it's just gonna get so long for you, and I don't want this to be some huge like undertaking. And so again, what I've seen a lot of people do is like pick 1. And then if you have thoughts about something else, you could take a paragraph or 2 to kind of talk about what doesn't fit. And like your other thoughts. So, because some movies and shows, they don't do it perfectly, right? They kind of blend disorders together. And so let's say you're like, I'm gonna argue X, but I want to tell you a little bit about Y because it's clearly part of the character. That would be acceptable, yeah. And again, so since the paper is due on the 24th, that's Wednesday next week. Let's say by like the end of Monday, like a week from today, if you want me to take a look at a rough draft, just make sure you email it to me by the end of Monday. And that will give me enough time to read it and get it back to you. And you're more than welcome to do that if you want a little bit of extra feedback. Otherwise, you're turning it in on Canvas. And I look forward to reading these. I know papers aren't fun to write, but hopefully you pick somebody you're interested in, and that helps a little bit. I'll see if you have any other questions next time, and we'll wrap up personality chapter and move on to 14. Have a wonderful rest of the day. See you on Wednesday. Bye.
I'm
See
so
you on
excited for
Wednesday.
this. I'm so excited for the paper.
Good.